Hi everyone, this is Songtradr Happy Hour. I'm your host, Victoria Wiltshire. We've got a great panel for you today, so grab yourself a drink and settle in. A special hello to our wonderful audience. Feel free to use the chat windows throughout the session. As usual, the last 20 minutes will be our interactive Q&A portion. So don't forget to enter your questions in the Q&A window on Zoom or via chat on Facebook. We will do our best to get to as many questions as we can, and we apologise if we don't get to yours. We'll try our best, we promise. So we have two very wonderful panellists for you today. Let me introduce them now. She spent 6 years working overseas, firstly in London, UK for E! Entertainment, and then to Conto Films in Mumbai, India, the region where the highest number of feature films in the world are produced, aka the love child of Bombay and Hollywood. Of course, you guessed it, it's Bollywood. Amongst her many achievements to date, she has been recognised by the Financial Post as one of the 100 most powerful women of the year. Wow. She's an Enterprising Women of the Year awardee and a top 40 under 40. She's also an ambassador to the UN for women's entrepreneurship and helps companies create financial and social impact in the brand and entertainment industries. Now as co-founder and CEO of Jive PR Digital, an award-winning agency in LA, Vancouver and Toronto. I'm exhausted already. We are excited to welcome someone who I suspect is not done by a long shot, Lindsay Nami Ash.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Our next guest has over 2 decades of industry success in high-level roles at organisations such as Filament Entertainment Group, Lowy Worldwide, Legis Delaney and Saatchi & Saatchi Advertising. He was the head of brand partnerships for Universal Music Group, where he led the vision, strategy and execution for all facets of brand partnerships. Having built the division from the ground up, he brought innovation and his magic touch to strategic partnerships with American Express, Marriott, American Airlines, Honda, Citi, Mars, and M&M's. On the talent side, his work is connected with artists like The Weeknd, Imagine Dragons, ex-ambassadors, Shawn Mendes, Lady Gaga, Carly Rae Jepsen, and Nick Jonas. A very warm virtual welcome to Mike Tunnicliffe.
Hello, hi. I barely recognise myself from that, but thank you.
Well, it's good. You're both very impressive. So we're very excited to have you both here. So our topic today is balancing branding with artistry. So I think most artists in any field, they have a good sense of what they can do to nurture their talent and hone their skills, which is the artistry part. But I think the concept of branding itself sometimes can be a little bit more elusive. And maybe we can start there. Yeah. Lindsay, how would you define brand or branding?
Well, I think I mean, there's many ways to define it, but I think for an artist, you have to look at yourself as a quote unquote product, but you can't productize yourself. So it's how they're able to take the tried and true principles of what makes you resonate with people to what makes you as a human. I would say, like, if we go back to branding fundamentals, the most successful brands in the world, what they do for their consumers is they make them feel like they're somehow going to receive a personal transformation from using that brand, or that brand somehow represents personal transformation for them. And I think especially as the age that we're moving into on the impact age, it's even more true. And so for me, I think artistry and branding is how can you create personal transformation? And it doesn't mean you have to be the best you can be, or, you know, sometimes, like, I know, Mike, you worked with Lady Gaga. I think she's a great example of her way of personal transformation is just owning her quote unquote weird, owning her uniqueness. And so figuring out the way that you can make yourself as an artist show personal transformation somehow. You don't have to appeal to everyone, but appealing to a niche market that believes in that.
Correct, I agree. If you try to appeal to everyone, you'll potentially not make anyone happy. So Mike, what about you? Do you agree with that?
I think, I mean, branding is my background before I got into my passion, which was music business, the music business which I combined with branding. And basically branding's very, it's very intangible. I mean, what is a brand? I mean, a brand is literally, you know, it is all what I'd describe as all facets of experiences that you give to a consumer, or in the case of an artist, to a fan. So how you look, how you feel, what you stand for, what causes you support, how you communicate with them, what your stage show's like, what sort of content you produce. And again, if you look at classic brands like Coca-Cola or Mercedes or BMW, they all have a sort of a style and an image about them that make you, to Lindsay's point, make you, whether it's want to transform, but make you want to be associated with them because you think they're going to do something good for you. And I think, you know, for artists in particular, because again, just as Lindsay said, you're not a product, but you're a personal brand, and personal branding is, as the name suggests, a very personal thing. So I think you, in effect, really need to weave your own style and your own identity and have your own story. And if you, if I just carry on, tell me to shut up if I'm going on too long. Otherwise, it could be 40 minutes have gone, but I'll try not to do that. But, you know, if you take, for example, Billie Eilish, who it was described last year as the most famous teenager on the planet, and she has such a unique style about her. I mean, you know, she really identifies with her fans, whether it's being vocal about the struggles of growing up, whether it's mental health issues that a lot of teenagers suffer from. She has her own look and feel, and she's what I'd describe as fashionably unfashionable. If you know what I mean. She's not classically fashionable, but she is actually super fashionable, but in her own way. She's a homegrown talent, and the whole story of the family traveling together, the dad does the light show, the mum's obviously looking after a lot of things, almost like the road manager on the road. Obviously, Phineas has co-written all the songs with her. They were all recorded at home in their home in Los Angeles. So family is very important to her. So she has an amazing story there, and I think fans really identify with that. And there are other examples I can talk about as well. But I think that's the number one thing: have your own style, your own identity, your own story, and make sure you communicate it incredibly well.
Yeah, and that's the key, isn't it? So you're saying if you're true to yourself, then that's a really good start.
Yeah.
So how about if we just stay on that one for a while? A lot of artists, I think, would have a really good sense of what they like in their art, what they don't like, what they naturally feel they want to do. When they start working with a brand or perhaps with a label, and then the experts come in, how difficult can it be for the artist to make that transition when there are differing views potentially from the experts who say, yes, this part is right, but we don't feel like your audience will resonate with this other part? Lindsay, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So I think, I mean, that's a great question because it happens all the time, whether it's a person or a brand. You know, the marketers always have their idea of what the audience wants, even if they're not the audience. And I think that if you're working with a strong marketing department or a strong marketer, they will see the value in you coming to the table with ideas and you coming to the table saying, no, this is my audience and this is how I can show it. So you almost, in a way, as an artist, you have to come with some data that backs up your points to speak the language of the marketing people, because they think they know because they do this day in and day out. But I can tell you, if I was in a branding session and an artist came to me saying, you know what, those are some great ideas, but look at who my audience is on Instagram. Look who's following me on TikTok. This is the profile of them and this is what they like. myself as a, hopefully as a good marketer, whoever that marketer is sitting there, would sit there and say, you know what, yeah, data does speak volume, and let's work with that. Let's weave that into the story. So I think there's a certain component that the artist needs to advocate for what they know. And I think, that does take confidence coming into it. So I think that once you decide, you're going into that meeting, you're going to define that voice, spend the time putting together a bit of a plan to justify it, because people find that credible. And I think, like I said, the data backs it up.
Yeah, I love that. Mike, what about you?
I think for younger, more up and coming artists, it's sometimes a little bit of a challenge with the data, particularly if you don't have a fan base. So again, I would say having a really compelling story and a compelling story that resonates with the brand is a very good way to get started. But I totally agree with Lindsay. Data is so important, and particularly when an artist starts to get on the rise and they've got a decent audience and a decent following, we can really start to mine that data from lots of different sources and see how that matches in with the brand's personality. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we run into when putting brand partnerships together is that the brand they've got a particular view of what they want to do and how they want to communicate it. But I always used to say to brands, look, you're going to get the best out of this if you relax into creativity. And a lot of brands would throw their hands up in horror and say, what do you mean relax into creativity? This is what we want it to look like. And I say, no, you're actually dealing with some of the most creative people in the world. And if you let those people, the artists, actually get involved in the creativity, you're going to get a lot more out of it. Be it at a major level, The Weeknd and Mercedes-Benz, who released their electric SUV, where he wrote a specific song, helped style the commercial. I remember working with Shawn Mendes just before Shawn really broke through. Shawn had the handwritten album out. And apologies to any of my colleagues from Universal Music Groups. They've heard me talk about this so many times, but it was a phenomenal program we did. And we got approached by Papermate Pens, who said, look, we've got this new pen, it's called the Inkjoy, it doesn't smudge. Obviously, there's a tie-in between handwritten and the pen. Let's have a no smears campaign. And whilst the brand were being very strategic and very on message for the pen, it wasn't really going to work with Shawn. So we actually got him involved in this, and we said, look, you're going to get all this support. You've got the opportunity to earn money, get promotion, and do something for your fans. So how do you think you can integrate this in? And he came up with a really good line, it was the Inkjoy, which was #spreadjoy. And what we did was we built on his, he had I suppose I'd call it a campaign or a cause or a messaging that was called Messages from Shawn, that was really about anti-bullying, self-enlightenment, self-enrichment. And really we built on that campaign with Spread Joy and got the fans at he did 25 venues, I think, got each of the fans to write messages of joy and hope and positivity using the Inkjoy writing stations that we set up at all of the venues. And then he'd use some of those messages would be used in the stage show, but a lot of them were used in the social media that came afterwards. And the fans got so into it that actually he posted way and above what he was contracted to post, which is always a big issue when you're dealing with artists. Always this whole negotiation about how many posts will the artist do, and it's like, you know what? If you get the artist really on board, the artist they're going to post a lot, which is exactly what he did, and then created an amazing lyric video with handwritten lyrics on it, and got phenomenal response. So I think if you can just relax into the brand itself and relax into the whole creative process and allow the allow the artists to input creatively, because the artists, again, should know their fans better than anybody else, what their fans actually like and what they're going to respond to.
So in your experience, Mike, working with the brands and the artists, what's the balance between artists coming to, let's say UMG, for instance, and saying we would like to partner with a brand, versus a brand saying, hey, we have a new campaign, can you find an artist for us? What does that look like in the process?
Well, I think if I could just speak generally, not specifically about UMG, but generally about the marketplace. I think certainly artists are, the whole notion of selling out is gone, right? And I think that's just that's a topic that doesn't even really resonate anymore. So artists aren't frightened about selling out. Artists can see the value that brands bring. Brands bring promotional opportunities for a big artist. They bring in promotional opportunity. They're bringing money on marketing. They probably spend 2 or 3 times the amount they spend on the actual partnership and endorsement on actually amplifying the programs themselves. So I think most artists, honestly, these days are pretty open to brand support, whether they're signed to a record label or they're independent artists and that haven't been discovered, or independent artists that actually are established. And I think from the brand's point of view, some brands really get it in music. And some brands are very nervous about it because it's a very confusing market when you look at it. And unless you've got a music specialist like Coca-Cola, Amex, PepsiCo, 3 companies that have always had a tradition of very good music specialists, I think as a brand, you look at the marketplace and you sometimes get a little bit freaked out. So you lend, which is partly why when I was at Universal, we built Universal Music Group and Brands. But brands need to be guided through a little bit the whole process. The licensing process, the legal process, the creative process. And I think brands can see the value of music. If you look at any research into music versus other entertainment like sports, film, cooking, etc., music appears top by a long way, a much bigger percentage than say even sports. If you look at brand research where brands have done really, I hate using the word authentic, but true, let's call it true partnerships, that are genuine partnerships, you see an uptick in brand sentiment. We certainly did with that Papermate campaign. So I think brands can recognize the value of music, but they're nervous and they need to be guided through it. And just to give you one statistic, I think, live music sponsorship is worth $1.6 billion in the US, which actually isn't a ton of money. Live sports sponsorship is worth 16 billion. Yet musicians and artists are more popular than sports personalities. So it's a very interesting space, and it's a great space for me personally to be in, because I'm trying to work out how to solve all those issues and problems and challenges. And I think there's great business opportunities there.
Right. So basically you're saying there's a lot of hand holding and juggling, a lot of discussion, I would imagine. Lindsay, your time in Bollywood to me is quite fascinating, because not many of us would have had a peek into the window of that world. Do you find that there are some key differences the way that branding is approached in different cultures, for instance?
Yeah. So keep in mind that when I lived and worked in Bollywood, that was 15 years ago almost now. So a lot has changed, but a lot has still stayed the same. So Bollywood has a very interesting star system. It's almost like, and in the US to some extent, but almost like they're revered as gods, but not gods that you build up and then tear down like we tend to do more in the West, but gods that really like reign, and then the family and the dynasty reigns. So Bollywood fathers passed on then the kids, and then so they almost work. And I, again, going back 15 years, but because I was part of that, I was part of the marketing department for Bollywood films, so we did this all the time. And you almost want to remove them from the general public, versus here and right now you want to bring them into the general public like they're your friend, and they could be sitting across the street from you, which they are, or across it on Instagram. So I do believe that culture does play into how a brand is done and perceived, and also like an ad that would work there would definitely not work here for a brand partnership. You know, you could do the cheesiest ad and it would be so well received and well respected. But here, if you associate with a brand that comes across as cheesy, or I know not to use the word authentic, but inauthentic, that like tarnishes your career. So I think that there's definitely nuances between cultures. And I think that going back to what Mike was saying and building off of that, it's really important that artists look, yes, it's not frowned upon to do brand partnerships anymore, but you still need to make sure that it is not going to tarnish you down the road because the way it's played off of, or brand people thinking that it should be a certain way when you in your heart know that it shouldn't. And I want to just say to artists, like, like if you're sitting there and someone tells you something and you're like, that doesn't feel right, like, you know when it doesn't feel right. And even if you can say it in the moment, say it in the moment. But if not, find someone who, a champion or who can sponsor you to go back and say it, because whatever your instinct is absolutely correct for you and your personal brand.
Yeah, so can I just follow up on that point? It's a very interesting point. I mean, when it goes wrong, I think when the artist absolutely doesn't deliver what's been agreed, where, just to Lindsay's point, they don't really like the brand, or they're not that into the brand. I mean, we had a case, I won't name the artist, but an artist who was involved in promoting a snack food, who actually we did the deal, we agreed everything, we got the contract done, and this particular artist got onto the set to do the shoot and held the product and decided that they couldn't actually go through with it because it was not a particularly nutritious product and not the sort of thing that they would eat normally, and actually they left the set. Now, as it was, we managed to sort things out and find another artist. But you've really got to make sure that you're absolutely comfortable with the brand, and you've got to be sure that you're comfortable with the creative proposition. And of course, the biggest no-no in the world is don't partner with a brand and then get seen using a competitor product, which, believe it or not, a few artists have done.
Yeah.
But they remain nameless.
Yes, of course. And that's a tricky situation too, because once an artist goes through that and they've basically left the whole production up in limbo, it would be very difficult for that brand or that organization to reach out and work with that artist again. So you have to do this early, don't you? Say yes or no. Great point. Lindsay, if I can touch on your mentoring work as well, because you mentor youth on entrepreneurship. How much does branding actually come into the conversation for you, and how do you actually introduce the concept to them?
It's funny. You almost don't have to introduce the concept right now, because the younger generation is grown up with branding and optics and YouTube and this. So it used to be something that I would say, 5 years ago when I was mentoring, it was very much, you had to teach it, and this is what they have to do, and it had to be a checklist on things. But now it's like people associate starting a business with starting an Instagram account. It's like the two go hand in hand. So, which is a really interesting shift of culture and how you do it. And so, like, some of the youth that are coming up, whether it's entrepreneurship in the entertainment industry and music, or or tech and healthcare. Like, their ideas are incredible. And I think that there's a lot, like, when we work with brands, we're like, just look and see what young people are doing. And I'm not talking like 20-year-olds. I'm talking like, what 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, what are they doing? And how can you move that into a context that would appeal more to the millennials or the older millennials? But there's so much innovation happening in the quote unquote branding space with the younger demographic. It's inspiring.
Yeah, they probably have a better understanding of it than we did when we grew up, where we had
built into their DNA. Yeah, it's built into their DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And they can sniff out brands that aren't authentic faster than we can like create an authentic campaign.
Well, that's good to know. If any brands are listening. So if I can talk about just some of the experiences that we've had as a music licensing company, we're always looking for artists to feature. And often, even though an artist might have amazing music, we won't be able to feature them because they may not have a good headshot or a good band image. And it's a very simple thing. And well, not simple actually getting the image created, because a lot goes on behind that, doesn't it? But if you do have one, just make sure that it's uploaded, it's up to date. And so that leads me to my next question. What are some simple things that artists can do to make sure that they don't send people off on the wrong track as far as their branding's concerned?
Yeah, I think so. So I want to start off with that. I think one, they got to do, as we said, they got to define their brand. So how do you actually do that? I think by understanding a little bit more about what your fans are about. One thing, seeing what sort of posts they're reacting well to and what they're not reacting well to. I think I'd also, if I was a young artist, I'd study what other artists are doing. So how are they being, if you like, authentic? I've used that word again. I'm going to slap my hand. Try not to use it for the third time. True to themselves. Let's call it that. And true to their core beliefs. And, you know, if you just look at, just to try and bring that to life, if you look at that and you say, well, what do some well-known artist brands stand for? You know, you said U2 and Bono, they're very humanitarianism. You know, Pearl Jam and Eddie Vedder, homelessness, fair pricing, fairness for fans, the environment, the oceans. Jack Johnson, the oceans, environmentalism. A lot of environmentalism comes in here, but you know, a lot of the artists that are really good have got a particularly clear, defined, if you like, brand persona, stand for something, and their fans really get behind it. The other thing, which is really super simple, is they have a look. They have a logo. And I know that, you know, a lot of people might throw their hands up, oh my God, I'm not a product. I don't need a logo. Actually, if you look at some of the logos, the Rolling Stones tongue, by the way, is everybody knows it. Thank you, Victoria. Is one of the most recognized brands in the world, which is quite amazing, ahead of many other major consumer brands. But if you just look at the style of saying it, it shows my upbringing, Def Leppard, or Led Zeppelin, you know, all the Stones themselves, or even, you know, get a bit more up to date with, you know, Drake or Billie Eilish or Justin Bieber or Ariana Grande. They've all got a brand look and feel, which sometimes is a logo. Now logos change over time, just like the Coke logo will and the Pepsi logo will, and they'll be updated. But I think you need you definitely need that consistency in terms of image and look and feel, as well as a good understanding of what you stand for.
Yeah, and I'll add to that on the tactical side. I think, like, just off the bat, if I was to we were to take on a new artist and what we'd represent, you want a high resolution headshot. And it doesn't have to be that you rent out a photo studio and do a massive headshot, but that like you have a solid, high resolution photo that you like. You need to have a bio written, and I think have a bio, a 25-word bio, a 50-word bio, and a 100-word bio. Just because, like you said, you would feature these artists if you could, but just because they don't have that, you can't. So you're missing out on opportunities. And it doesn't have to be all this polished, super big thing. Like just have those on the standby, ready to go out and send out what you need. And also music, video. Like just try to have some, it doesn't have to be a high resolution shot video or even sound. Like you'd be surprised how many tactical elements you don't have in place that aren't hard to do. And on the logo side of things, if you're an artist just starting out and you don't want to pay a ton of money, 99 Designs is a great website where you can go and get some incredible logo designs, get some font, like just if you elevate yourself, you all of a sudden bigger and more established to people, and you're going to get more opportunities that way. But it doesn't have to be a huge financial investment.
So Lindsay, you work with across many verticals, across many industries. What's some of the best examples of branding that you've seen, perhaps in an influencer or an artist or an organization?
Yeah, I mean, well, going back, Lady Gaga, I think she's an example of just true to herself, ups and downs, but she's owned every part of it in her career. So, and again, I know that's very high level, but Jack Johnson, you mentioned, Mike.
Yeah.
He is such a good brand because he just is true to who he is in everything he does. Yeah. So for me, those are two very different examples, but very strong examples. On the brand side, you can find so many, but I think it's the ones that don't try to be everything to everyone that end up doing better. There's a great skincare line called Ordinary, and check it out if you haven't checked it out. But the way that they brand is they tell you we're not for everyone. You shouldn't use our product if. And I think that just goes to speak to brands that do it right because they know what they're supposed to be getting across, and they don't care. They want to do them.
Yeah. Or something like Dove, which took a position on real women. You remember, which goes back a long time ago. Which they basically decided not to use stick-thin models in the advertising anymore and feature real women, and they kept on with that message in a very consistent way, very true to their core brand values. And it's that brand. I used to work on that brand actually when I looked after the Unilever business for Interpublic Group. That brand went through the roof off the back of that particular that particular strategy.
Because it was authentic?
Because it was authentic and very true to the values, yeah.
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 I'm going to use that word in every second sentence now, and Mike's going to hate me by the end of this.
We'll have a swear box. It's an authentic box.
Okay, what should I put into it? Is it $1? Anyway, that's a silly question. So for either of you, when you're in the discovery process for talent or for an artist, what do you look for? Do you typically like someone who has a really strong sense of identity and their own branding, and obviously it has to complement the use that you're looking for them for, or do you like someone who can be shaped a little bit?
Yeah, sort of depends. I did a lot of work on, personally did a lot of work on this on the Honda Stage program. And the Honda Stage program moved from lots of shots of live performances to actually telling, I think it was called Honda Unstage or Honda Backstage, I think, where we told the stories of the artists, and they were younger, up-and-coming artists. So we had Alice in Wonderland, and we had Jessie Reyes, interestingly, who I'd worked with quite a lot. And what Honda were after were artists that they didn't necessarily have to be well known. In fact, the two that I've mentioned at the time were starting to break through. But they had to be artists whose story resonated with the Honda brand story, which was, I remember this vividly because I sat in so many meetings, imagination, determination, and challenging spirit. And when you look at the content, and I urge any artists that are listening, or any brand marketeers actually, listening, watching, hello everybody, actually go on to the Honda stage website, or go on to Uprocks, who shot actually a lot of the content. They did a fantastic job. And look at the stories, because it's really the story behind the artist, and look at how that's actually been created. The Jessie Reyes one is amazing, you know, because she had a whole, she, you know, fought racism, sexism, went from, I think she was from Vancouver, went from Vancouver down to Miami, had a job waiting on tables, sat on the beach every afternoon, wrote songs, posted them on YouTube, tried, went back up to Canada, tried, and was really determined, really imaginative, and very definitely had that challenging spirit. And I think she was one of the best artists that was covered on that particular program.
Lindsay, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I would just say and echo, but I think having a strong knowing of who you are helps any brand marketer, because you don't want to be turning someone into something that they're not, because it really does come through. But with that being said, the artist still needs to be open to working with the people that are going to help make their career even more successful. So there's nothing worse than working with someone who is true to themselves, but a nightmare to work with. And in the entertainment industry, we've come across it a lot, especially on the film and TV side. And it's hard. It's more challenging to help them elevate their career, even though there's such genius in them. So they're too much themselves, that they're not open to weaving their creativity in with that of the brand.
Oh, that's such a tricky balance, though. So, you know, when do you stand your ground, and when do you listen and change? You know, especially for an artist where it's very personal, their own branding. You know, it's very hard to let go of any of it, I think.
I think it's like everything. I think it's like everything, though. Like when you want something, you know, saying, I want it this way, that's never going to get you anywhere, whether it's in a relationship, but approaching it openly and saying, oh, you know what, that's a great idea, but how about this thought? People still deal with people, right? So at the end of the day, it's not artist versus brand, it's person and person collaborating. And if you can figure out how to have your communication and negotiation style be open, I think you're going to go a lot further at getting what you want weaved into what you do. It's the nature of relationships.
Agree. Mike? Yeah,
I definitely agree with that, and I've touched on some of those points before, about, you know, if we're talking about working with brands that you feel comfortable with, if it's changing your own branding and your own imagery. I mean, obviously, you know, there are many skilled people out there. With, you know, if you're lucky enough to have a good manager really helps hugely. The manager, actually, in many ways, some of the best managers around, same like Scooter Braun, are almost like the CMOs, the brand managers, actually helping the artists change as they grow up. And I mean, a lot of artists start off so young, and then they, you know, go through their early to mid 20s, and they're growing up, and all the issues and challenges that come with that, but also that audience are growing up. So what the brand image that you might have had when you were, I'm making this up, 18, is not going to may not appeal to your audience when you're 27 and when they're 27. You see what I mean? Because the audiences are growing up with the artists as well. And if you just look at consumer brand, consumer brands do change and tweak their style and imagery. They're still true to their core beliefs, but they do change the way that they look and communicate.
Mm. So I guess you're saying too that your choice of the people that work around you, if you have a manager, actually.
And don't forget the labels as well. I know people love to bash record labels, but the record labels have got the most, and then this is what I loved at Universal, the most incredibly skilled executives in the record labels that have worked with so many artists over the years and been in so many different situations. And I think, the really good labels and the really good label heads and the marketing people, the A&R people that can help shape that artist's career big time.
Well, this brings me to the question to either of you. What do you wish that you'd known at the beginning of your career, which would have saved you a lot of pain? Who wants to jump in first?
When I open a beer, man.
That's authentic.
You know what? I think it goes, for me, I think it goes back to my original point. It's not so much about what I wish I knew about the industry or the business, but what I learned about interpersonal relationships and how to communicate with someone versus some tactic. And I think if you can learn to have a growth mindset and know how to have dialogue to get what you want forward, that will help you out in any situation. And I feel like that's a skill set that should be taught in high school or college, because that applies to every aspect of your life and in your career. And it's invaluable. And it's surprising how many people just don't have the skill set because they've just never been taught.
Well said. Mike?
I think probably, when you're young and you start out, and I was very lucky. I started out at Saatchi and Saatchi Advertising. It became one of the most famous ad agencies in the world. I started out there when there were 200 people. Sorry, this will give away how old I am, but my first job was, I had the choice of working on Margaret Thatcher's 1983 re-election campaign or joining London Records to look after Bronski Beat. I chose Margaret Thatcher. But it was interesting that I think I was in such an environment in those days that you became quite it was a maverick environment. Advertising in the 80s, hugely maverick. The company was a very maverick but brilliant company. And I think if I could look back, I think that was phenomenal grounding for me. But I think as I grew older, I should probably myself personally been less maverick than perhaps I was. But now I've grown up, I don't care. No, I do care, but I think I went through a certain phase in my career, probably in my, I was pretty successful. I was CEO of a company when I was 30, but I was a pretty maverick CEO. And I think I'd have probably done better and probably enjoyed myself a little bit more if I hadn't been quite that maverick. There you go. Don't anyone use this against me ever, please.
I'm just writing it down. We're not recording. I think everyone has some maverick stories, especially when they're a bit older and they look back. So you're not alone. I think it's question time now. So drum roll. I'm going to go to our Q&A panel here. Let me see. From Samuel Anderson, what about branding yourself with merchandise? Is that helpful? T-shirts, jewelry for your fans? What do we think?
Yeah, I think massively. And remember, the merch business has moved on a lot from what I call the grotty T-shirts in the cardboard boxes or the back of the van. There's some really cool merchandise around. I mean, obviously for the bigger artists, I know Bravado were very good at doing this. For the bigger artists, it was what we call, I think it was a term that the New York Times used, which was elevated merchandise. so limited edition merchandise, special merchandise. But I think even as a smaller artist, you can think outside of the box. Create cooler things, not just the t-shirts and the caps and all that sort of stuff. And actually, interestingly, as we've gone into, I actually sit on the board of, and I'm an investor in an augmented reality company listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and we've been doing a lot of work in the live streaming space. And what I call the actual term for them is NFTs, non-fungible tokens, but they're unique blockchain-backed tokens, so they can be medals, unique collectible items. That business that's really cool, and it's really taking off. So it could be something that's completely unique to you, like the European Sports League, La Liga, introduced non-fungible tokens 2 days ago. They sold $1.2 million worth of unique tokens to basically digital product.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've worked on a film before that was completely financed, self-financed indie filmmaker who had a bit of a following and on those tokens. Yeah. And I think it made everyone feel like they were part of. So it's like Kickstarter but a different level, right? And I think it's great branding. That's a really good point. And I also just like on t-shirts right now, they're so on trend to have a really cool slogan on a t-shirt or a few witty words, and it's not expensive to make. So I think for you as an artist, if you have an expression that you love or something, like put it on a t-shirt with your name underneath of it in a cool design, and throw it up there, because right now, like that's on point. People are looking for cool t-shirts and people that they believe in.
Yeah, I've seen logos on masks too, so it goes everywhere, right? So we have a Facebook question. This is Ryan Cullinan. I hope I said that correctly. When it comes to upcoming artists' biographies, should they have their biographies written professionally? Lindsay, perhaps you?
Yeah, so I think it's very important to have a collaborative process on that. I think you always need a professional to help convey what you want to say into words that are going to be easily digestible. Just like, I always say, you wouldn't do your own root canal. Like, leave an expert to do what they do, but make sure that you're part of the process. You don't want it to be ghostwritten by someone who makes up everything that you say. So even if you dictate it and just do chapter dictations and then give it to them to scribe and put the essence around, but choose your partner who's going to write it really carefully, because every writer has a different angle and a different way that they come across. So make sure it's something, read their past work, and also ask them for references of people that they've worked with in the past to get testimonials from them on what they're like to work with. Because an end product is not the whole story. You want to know what they're like the entire time as you're going through it.
Yeah. If I could just add to that, I'd totally wholeheartedly agree. You should have a professional do it. Even if everybody's a personal brand, whether you're a music artist or not. If you're a business executive, you're a personal brand. And it's interesting, I've just been through that process myself of having my biography rewritten by a professional. And it was interesting because I'm not a bad writer myself, but my version of it and the version we ended up with were really, really different. But still kept to the essence of the story, but in terms of the way it was presented. So it would grab your attention immediately, and I think it's essential for artists to do that. So without losing the truth and the truthfulness of their brand.
What's your biography, Mike? What's it called?
No, it's not a book. It was my professional biography.
Oh, I thought you wrote a book about yourself.
A biography, it'd be called Rock and Roller Coaster. And the last chapter would be called Growing Old Disgracefully, but that's about as far as I've got.
Yeah, I might compete with you on that one, that second one. Yeah, that was going to be my question too. What would you call it if you did have one? So that was a really good question, I think. If we go back to Zoom, Charles Gillette wants to know, what do you think are some of the best avenues to invest in terms of marketing yourself to build your brand? What are some companies that do great with marketing indie artists / writers / producers?
I mean, I think the easiest one for artists to do right now is social media. I know it's overplayed, but it's a great way to get instant feedback on your thing, see what resonates, see what doesn't. You know, once you start there and you build up a certain credibility, you also meet people through social, especially now that we're home a lot more. The amount of relationships that I've forged with people online or through different platforms, like that's an easy way to start. Mike, I don't know if you have any other marketing hacks.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say socials myself, and also just seeing. I mean, I made this point a little bit earlier, but also seeing how people react to what it is that you're posting. You know, and sort of fine tuning things accordingly. I think also, I mean, the quality you get from video these days. You know, shooting stuff on your iPhone, and so I think getting more short. People don't want to sit there watching 40 minutes of you talking about. I think short, sharp, um, uh, short form content that gives some insight into what you're about as a person, what you're about creatively. If you're making the album, what creative process you're going, just stuff that gives fans an understanding of you. I know there's some research that I've seen in the past, certainly those people that are really into music love all of the, you know, and what we probably call the super fans, love all of the behind the scenes stuff. I mean, for me, I'm a music nut. I get so excited if there's something that's been shot in the recording studio. There's some great footage I saw of Radiohead in a studio that a filmmaker had created. I remember I didn't want to watch any Radiohead live. I wanted to watch Tom York talking in the studio and the whole creative process that he went through. So I think, as I said, video content, short form is a really good thing to add into, and obviously socials important. You distribute through the socials in any case.
Yeah, and just building on that, a really good hack that I think artists can do is you can test your music. So just like we test movie trailers for films that are about to release, we'll put a budget. It doesn't have to be a huge budget, but like $25, $50 on Facebook ads or Instagram ads behind a video, and just see the reactions that you get to them is a great way to spread the message, spread the word. And people always think they have to have huge budgets to do marketing, but you really don't. Like you just, you know, $25, $50, test it out and see the responses that you're getting to certain things. But definitely be having video content out there. Also, a technical term, SEO, but you can list different videos on websites. So it doesn't have to just be on, you can link your video from YouTube on different listing sites and index. Hire an SEO person to help you do it. But it's just, you know, you never know who's going to see something where, even if it doesn't seem like a completely relevant place to put it. It's spreading the message out there wider.
Wonderful. Okay, Facebook. Jason Pipkin, do you have any book recommendations for understanding and establishing your brand? Any books that we've read on branding, or even maybe a site or an organization that they could go and have a look at?
Yes,
Yeah.
but I'd have to look it up online because I can't remember the name.
That's what I'm thinking as I go through. I have a million things
in my bookshelf over there.
Okay, well, perhaps while you're thinking about it, we could move to the next question too, unless you have something that's popped in right now.
You know what I can do? I can send you, I have some really, really good branding resources. So I'm going to send them to you, and then maybe you could post them on Songtradra's Facebook, something like that, if you want, because there's some really, really strong stuff with lots of free content for people.
It was quite an old book written called Rockstar Branding, or Rockstar Brands, that actually takes consumer brands and talks about how they've branded themselves like rock stars, which is, it's not specific practical advice for a young up and coming artist, but if you're into the whole branding space, it is a very interesting book to read.
Great, thanks for that. And we will post those links. Thank you, Lindsay, when you get them to us. So again, on Facebook, Steph Joyce wants to know, and we did touch on some of this before, what is the biggest mistake you see when new artists are starting to establish their brand?
Trying to be everything to everyone. I think that's like a sure recipe for failure, and caring too much about what people say about you. I've seen, new artists, new brands get so caught up in the comments. There's always going to be haters, and you need to be able to see past it. But I think number one mistake is trying to be everything to everyone.
Yeah, as we said at the beginning, when you go back to branding itself and developing your brand, you're developing your brand to appeal to your audience, and your brand is really everything that's truthful about you. So just backing up Lindsay's point, don't deviate from that. And it's tough out there, because you will get a lot of bad comments sometimes, and you've got to be incredibly thick-skinned. I'd be terrible being a music artist. I'd be responding to everybody, but I've got to be pretty thick-skinned, unfortunately.
Yeah. I have a good for people. I think, sometimes it's hard to see who we are. We have an idea of who we are in our mind, but ask the 5 people closest to you. Just say, how would you describe me? And it's so fascinating to hear what they say back to you, and see if there's a common theme behind all 5 descriptions, because how you might think you come across is not how people that are close to you perceive you. So it's an interesting exercise for everyone. Never mind if you're trying to build a personal brand or not. I think it's fascinating to see how we come across differently than we think.
Yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? We don't always see ourselves the way that other people do. Mike, were you going to say something else, or should we go to the next question?
No, let's go to another question.
Okay, well, this one is from Anonymous. How to market music for producers who don't do live shows or have a big persona. So I think they're asking how to market music for producers. Oh, I think this person is a producer perhaps, and wants to know how they market themselves even though they don't do live shows or have a profile. I hope I've interpreted that correctly.
I think it's very challenging. It's interesting. I have my son is a producer, and not that he listens to his dad that often, but he's probably tuning in now. But actually, I would say you can build your profile online without becoming a big persona, right? There still needs to be something about it, even if you're the guy behind the scenes. If you start off with, even let's say someone, a very good producer that I know and have worked with, and is a friend of mine, is Alex the Kid, Alex Grant. He's behind Imagine Dragons and Ex Ambassadors and Skylar Grey and various other artists. I mean, he doesn't do live shows. He has become a big persona, but there was a time when he wasn't very well known at all, and he's just sort of gradually built, he doesn't have big socials, but he's become well known in the industry and has done some very cool stuff. And I suppose, I think I'm struggling a little bit with the answer, but in answer to that question, it sort of depends. I'd probably ask a question back and say, well, where do you want to actually get to? What do you ultimately want? do you want to be known, or do you want to be known? Do you want to be known amongst the fans, or do you want to be known amongst the business community? So you can get more producing work. In which case there are probably different approaches. So it's a slightly challenging question to answer.
Yeah, I agree. And that actually, I was thinking too that even though we feature artists, we also like to feature producers and composers, people who potentially are more behind the scenes. So I would encourage anyone who wants to get their personas more active in the industry, even from a point of view of us recognizing a name and saying, hey, I recognize that composer, let's feature them. Think about your branding as well, even having a good headshot and having your bio, as Lindsay said. So if I go back to the Zoom Q&A, I have, I think it's on the same line here. Scott Huskin. Scott was here last time too. Hi, Scott. Thank you all for this meeting. I am a composer, a drummer, an author, and I host a podcast. I also don't sleep. You probably wouldn't. I brand everything together as me, but should these be separate brands?
I would say, without knowing all the ins and outs, they're all part of you, they're all part of the overall Scott Haskin brand. Now, whether you market them separately, and there's a difference between branding them separately and marketing them separately. But I think, again, I need to go into more detail, but I think that's all part of what makes up the persona of Scott Haskin. And actually, to me, it's super interesting that Scott is a composer, drummer, an author, a host of a podcast. That's like stuff that I find very interesting. So I'd take all of that and try and package it together as a brand, but you might want to market them in different ways.
Yeah, I agree. I think keep them together, but have a very unique story that ties the thread through. I think one of the things we actually haven't spoken of specifically is the power of storytelling for branding. So it's about the beliefs, the values, what you represent, but what's the narrative? And spend some time creating a narrative, because that, I agree, a composer, a drummer, an author, a pocket, like those are very different things. So there's got to be a unique story there. And how can you say that story when you meet someone under 60 seconds, your elevator pitch? But I think narrative is really important for everyone, artists, to have everything that speaks to who they are and how they got to where they are and where they want to go.
And I just want to acknowledge Jeff because it looks like he's asked the same question about behind the scenes composers, and should they be concerned with branding as opposed to a more forward facing artist such as a singer songwriter. So I don't know if either of you have anything else to add.
Yeah, again, I think, if Jeff is in a, what we call, sorry, I'm being a bit marketing speak this afternoon, but is not interested in being a performer and doing live and all the rest of it, wants to do great producing work. He's in what we would call a business to business situation. So he wants to sell his services inside the business. And as I made the point before, even as an executive, running any sort of company, or any executive at any level in any business situation, you still need to have a brand. I think you've got to stand out. So I would definitely have the, sorry, it was Jeff, wasn't it? Was it Jeff? Yeah, Jeff. I would definitely have the Jeff brand. What does the Jeff brand look like, feel like? What's Jeff true to?
Jeff says, I'm a drummer as well, lol.
Jeff and Scott need to hang out.
Yeah, they should actually, and not sleep together, right? Oh, that came out weird. I was always going to put my foot in it at some time.
Yeah, you meant, no, I'm not going to say anything, so I'll put my foot in as well.
Don't go there. Don't drag me down further. Couple more questions, I think. Shanti Grange, how can I get a breakthrough in the US as a dancehall artist?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, tough.
It's I think that a lot of the answers are the same. You know, about defining your own personal brand, getting a following, understanding your fan base. I mean, I'm not massively knowledgeable of the dancehall scene, but I think it's the same. It's the same stuff about you know, defining who you are and understanding who your audience is going to be.
Yeah, and I think just to add on that is integrating yourself into the community. If that's what you want to break into, there's just like Songtradr is doing this webinar. There's so many different brands and different niches, or companies in different niches hosting stuff like that. So just know the people in the industry. Follow them on LinkedIn too for a more business to business contact. Follow them on Instagram, but ingrain yourself and know who the current players are in the space, and reach out to them at some point. I think, I don't know for you guys, but for me right now, I'm so much more accessible because of COVID, because I'm here, and when people are reaching out to me, I want to help more. You know, I've always wanted to help, but right now I feel even more compelled to give back in time. And I can't tell you how many virtual coffees I've taken with people through COVID. So I think now is a great opportunity to be able to ask people for coffees and for more one-on-ones. We don't have to drive to meet. It's really easy.
Great point.
Yeah, especially in LA. We love to be on the road, don't we? So 2 more questions, I think, here. Daniel, any strategies for marketing artists across cultures, for instance, Western artists to Asia or vice versa? It's interesting.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of that. So the department that I was responsible for when I was working in Mumbai was I sold Indian content to foreign markets. So that's all we did was cross-pollinate, integrate. I think that, you know, again, 15 years ago was very different than it is now, but be sensitive. I'm saying that to everyone and every client right now. Like, you have to be more sensitive and more mindful of the messages that you're putting out. And the storytelling. Why are you going there? What do you want to resonate? And I need to know more about the context to be able, I think, to give better advice, because that's a fully loaded question. But if I knew a little bit more about what type of thing, I could probably give a better answer.
Mike, anything to add to that?
Yeah, again, just like Lindsay, I'd need if you like, a slightly more in-depth background and brief. But I'd also just think about collaborations with local artists. I think it's a very good thing. And there are quite a few examples of that. I've done that myself. I had a stint being a manager for a while. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but I fused punk with Bhangra and put together Dala Mendi, great Indian artist, with a punk band. And actually we got to #1 on BBC Radio India for 6 weeks. But there's a whole other story on that.
Well, that can be the next panel, yeah. So last question, John Petruccelli, are brands expected to get more active in music live streaming? Very relevant now, huh?
Sorry, can you just repeat that? Hello, John. I know John very well.
Oh, okay. Are brands expected to get more active in music live streaming?
Okay, good question. Personally, I would say yes. I think one of the challenges, though, and John, I was about to contact you, so I'll contact you after this. But I think one of the challenges, though, is that because obviously there's no live out there right now, so live streaming has taken off. I think a lot of live streaming is begun. I saw some research. I think there was some Nielsen research on this that I saw the other day. Shows that people are starting to get a little bit bored with live streaming. So I think we need to find a way of making it more engaging, and for the fans the brands to bring some other element to the fans. Through my augmented reality company, we've been doing that. I spoke about the fungible tokens, but there are lots of different things that you can do with augmented reality and virtual reality and that sort of stuff. So I think, to answer John's question directly, I think brands are going to be interested because the brands that are into live music, because there's no more live at the moment. But I think also the live streaming companies need to be realistic about what they're charging and what they're going to deliver. I mean, the brands are obviously interested in the eyeballs they're going to get, as well as being associated with cool stuff, but there needs to be some sort of return on investment. And it's been amazing how many live streaming companies I've spoken to that have contacted me that have said, could you help us get a brand to get this off the ground? The thing to remember, and John knows this very well, the thing to remember is that brands they're not there to bankroll everything. They're there for a commercial transaction. But I think in answer to John's question, I think this is for those smart companies, and John runs a very smart company called Bulldog, which we've partnered with on live stuff, partnered with on live streaming before. For those very smart companies, I think this is a really amazing, there's an amazing opportunity to really monetize live streaming going forward.
Great. Thank you, John. Lindsay, any last words on that one?
Oh yeah, I echo that. I think, the clients that we're working with right now too, everyone's trying to figure out how to get involved in this space in a way that is, authentic. Sorry, Mike, but I do.
In the box.
Absolutely. They're all looking on ways to get involved, and also from a lot of, on the film side of things, there's so much money being pulled out of festivals and what have you, and they're looking for places to put it. So I think now is a prime opportunity to get those dollars.
That's wonderful. So with that, we've run out of time for our session. To the very authentic Lindsay and Mike, thank you so much for your time today. It really has been such a pleasure. You both rock, I reckon. And thank you you're welcome. Thank you to our lovely audience. We hope that you found this happy hour very valuable and enjoyable. You'll be able to view the full session on YouTube tomorrow. Look out for a link in the webinar follow-up email or the post on our social channels. Coming up in our next session, we'll be discussing music in the world of gaming. So look out for details. Stay safe, all of my friends, and be kind to each other. See you in 2 weeks for our next happy hour. Cheers.
Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you. Bye.